And again, this title is named How the US Stole the Middle East. From whom US stole Middle East? From French? From Russians? Or from British? It's very interesting for me. Or maybe from people who live there. Yeah, come on, say me please.
Regions of power in the Middle East.
Hello, my dear friends. Hello, my name is Alex and I study English, and today I will watch with you video. This video was recommended me by Michael Halim. Thank you again, Michael Halim, for your recommendation, because with your recommendations I can improve my English, and it is interesting way for communication with you. And yes, this video is named How the US Stole the Middle East. And for me, it will be very interesting to know your comments about this topic, what you know about this. I will be glad to read your opinion. And also, I want to say what I'm watching such videos only because I want to improve my knowledge about this world, improve my English skills, because when more I study or watching something, the more I'm understanding how stupid I am. Yes, and it is truth. What I don't know, I know nothing about Middle East. Of course, I know what country you can find in this place, what people live there, and I want to say you, everywhere you can find the good people and bad people, believe me. And yeah, let's watch Johnny Harris doing really interesting videos, and his videos always have a high quality, yeah, and that's why I'm happy to watch this review. Let's find out what is it about, what this video. Okay, I'm talking too much.
The Middle East, the part of Asia that Europeans see as the middle of what they see as the East. Sort of arbitrary, whatever, we call it the Middle East. This part of the world is
arbitrary. Okay, and also sometimes, if you know, I'm translating, because, come on, arbitrary. It was
arbitrary.
Okay.
Is literally where civilization started, right here in modern-day Iraq. And over the years, the borders here have been redrawn many times as empires have ebbed and flowed through this region. By the way, I didn't make this time-lapse. A very talented YouTuber did, and he deserves a medal for it. Or perhaps just a new patron. Thanks, man. Anyway,
I like when people respect others' work. It's very important, and that's why I will leave a link from original video from Johnny Harris, because I respect his work.
The most recent carving up of this region happened by European powers. The French, the British, the Russians. I mean, are we surprised? No. Like, of course it was the British, of course it was the French, of course it was Europeans, of course. The lines they drew didn't really take into account language or ethnicity or regional identity. They just sort of sliced it all up amongst themselves and said, these are our new regions.
And again, this title is named How the US Stole the Middle East. From whom US stole Middle East? From French? From Russians? Or from British? It's very interesting for me. Or maybe from people who live there. Yeah, come on, say me please.
Regions of power in the Middle East. Eventually those European powers left, but the lines they drew stuck around and became the skeleton for what the borders look like today. And this is where our story starts. in the 1930s, here in the modern Middle East. At this point, across the ocean, there was this growing superpower that had spent the last century moving west, taking over this whole continent and beyond, deep into the Pacific Ocean. We've talked about that a bit. But
Okay.
things were changing. The world had just fought a brutal world war that was fought with new weapons that were powered by this new important substance, oil. Germany lost that war, in part because they didn't have access to enough oil to keep up with this new style of warfare that relied a lot more on machines. The young superpower realized that access to this stuff would determine who would be powerful and who would not. So they stopped looking west for a moment and turned east, with hopes of finding the fuel they needed to build their power. The US presence in the Middle East started with one little dot, right here. But soon that dot would expand into a sprawling network of alliances, covert attacks, flows of weapons, money, and the building of innumerable bases, and eventually turning into full-on ground wars. This is how the US stole the Middle East.
Ready and willing to employ all means necessary.
Okay, so it's the 1930s, and
Who was it speaking? This man? I think it was maybe president of USA.
the US doesn't have a significant
Of the
presence in the
USA.
Middle East at this point. But that's about to change because there's a company based in California that wants to explore this vast desert for oil.
11,000 miles from San Francisco, there lies a primeval desert, a mass of drifting sand and sun-baked earth, 1/3 the size of the United States.
This was sort of a risky decision for the California company because first off, they had no idea if there was actually any oil here.
They knew it would mean sinking into the desert the money of
I'm very often interrupt this video, but again, I want to say I love these sounds, sounds of old movies. Yeah, it's very interesting.
thousands of stockholders in a project that might well end in
It reminds me past where I never was.
complete loss.
And second off, this desert was a part of a very hardcore religious kingdom.
The fact that Mecca is the source and the shrine of Islam gives Saudi Arabia a central place in the Islamic and therefore the Arab world.
That was home to the holiest sites in Islam, run by a dogmatic royal family that did not like outsiders, especially non-believing Westerners. But even still, the king of the Desert Kingdom eventually gives the California company permission to explore almost 1 million square kilometers of this desert looking for oil. And after a few years, the bet paid off. And on March 3rd, 1938, in this little patch of coastal desert, they struck gold. Well, actually they struck oil, but it might as well have been gold. So throughout the 30s and 40s, American oil executives, workers, and their families started flocking to the Middle East, establishing the first significant American presence in the region. They set up little cities around the oil operation that were little slices of America, full of the deepest sinful behavior, like allowing women to drive and the consumption of alcohol.
Here is another American colony, complete with air-conditioned houses, 2 hospitals, and an outdoor movie theater.
This is the sort of stuff that is very off limits in Saudi Arabia. It's literally illegal at this point. So you have a lot of Saudis who are not happy about their government letting the Americans in to behave however they want. But the oil kept flowing. And soon the US government goes to the royal family and says, listen, the oil is flowing better than ever. This is awesome. How about we build a little military base attached to our little oil city so that we can, protect you and protect us and protect the oil and stuff. And the Saudis are like, okay, having the great Satan come to our country for oil is one thing, but letting them set up a full-on military base on our soil, and especially when everyone in our country is not happy with their presence in the first place. But, said the royal family, all of this oil is really valuable and it's really nice and we're getting super rich, so they're like, yeah, sure, set up the base. But there was one stipulation that the Saudis had for the Americans. You are not allowed to literally plant a flag, no flagpoles of the United States. You cannot put your flag anywhere on this base. Instead, you can put a little plaque on the side of the building so that your flag is not literally on our soil. And that was the deal. And that's exactly what happened. The US sets up its first military operation in the Middle East in the form of a landing strip that is right next to this oil field.
I think in their position, it is, of course, why not? I want to have a rich country. Yes, I want my country to be rich. And my people who live in this country, of course, I want to be rich too. And it is a good solution. Of course, why not? And especially if it is protecting somebody, their business, if I can say so.
Okay, so all of this infrastructure that the Americans were building required someone to build it. They needed a construction company. And there was one construction company that the Americans really liked that helped them build their oil city and their base. This company was founded and run by a guy named Mohammed. Now listen, do you think I'm really giving you the backstory on the construction company that built the air base and the oil city just because that's interesting and I like to talk about construction? No, this is actually very relevant to the story, and you will see why very soon. So the Americans and the Saudis are having this forbidden oil bromance, and it's going really well, and they are
This game with words, bromance, romance.
the oil is flowing, everyone's getting rich, and meanwhile, the rest of the Middle East is looking at Saudi Arabia and they're like, dude, WTF, why are you like in bed with America? And like, why are you letting them set up a landing strip in your country? And the Saudi royals are like, do you realize how rich we're getting right now? Like, if you were in our position, you would do the same thing, Egypt. Okay, so it's the 1950s, and let's get back to Mohammed, the construction guy. His company, by this point, is thriving. The American presence in oil land is just exploding, and he is building all of the stuff for it. And so this guy has a giant business. And he starts to have children. Well, in fact, he had a lot of children, like 54 children, because he had 22 wives, because that is a thing in Saudi Arabia to this day. Anyway, the point is, one of Mohammed's sons is named Osama.
Osama bin Laden. Oh, look at their clothes. He looks pretty. I can say, yes, they all looks fashionable. Yeah, can I say so? Fashionable. And I think all these people, it is children of Mohammed bin Laden. And yeah, they're very rich.
I told you this was going to be relevant. Okay, a reminder that Saudi Arabia is not the entire Middle East. So, I'm going to leave the Osama bin Laden cliffhanger for a moment to tell you what else was going on in the Middle East at this time. Remember that it was the hunt for oil that brought the US to Saudi Arabia originally. But now, in the 50s and 60s, there was a new reason for the US to think about the Middle East. And that reason is because there's another big superpower that has nuclear weapons, called the Soviet Union, who is coming into the region and saying to everyone, come join Team Communism. And the US is like, hold my beer. So in addition to oil, the US is now involved in trying to not let the Soviet Union have any power in this region. Over in Iran, there was a democratically elected leader that the US didn't like. They thought he was maybe a little too friendly with the Soviet Union. So they worked together with the British to literally overthrow the government of Iran so that they could install a dictatorial leader that was more friendly to the United States. Little side note here, the airport that I fly out of here in DC is named after the guy who like gave the go-ahead for this coup in Iran, John Foster Dulles. So I'm reminded of the whole Iran thing every time I fly. So the US has its oil thing, it's now involved in trying to prop up a dictator in Iran. There's another big thing happening that brings the US into the region, which is that the newly declared state of Israel is starting to piss off its neighbors and starting to look to the US for support. And the US gladly offers it, seeing Israel as a friendly nation in the region that could be a big proponent of US interests.
And if I'm right, or I hope I'm right, what USA and Israel have good relationships now, and Saudi Arabia too. Oh my God, I forgot how to pronounce everything.
So the US starts to fund Israel with tons of money and fighter jets and all of these things to help them fight their wars against their Arab neighbors. There was a debate happening in the United States on whether or not they should actually do all of this to support Israel so intensely, because they knew if they did, they were going to piss off all of the neighbors in the Middle East. And all of the neighbors are the ones who had the oil. In the end, the US did decide to support Israel. And with that came a major backlash from all of these oil-producing countries in the neighborhood.
It is a crisis of such proportion that we probably haven't even begun to grasp it yet as far as the country is concerned.
Scenes like this are becoming all too common on both sides of the Atlantic. But for America, they are more ominous. They tell the Arabs that their oil weapon is wounding America, the country that supports and supplies their enemy Israel.
Eventually, this backlash against supporting Israel kind of calmed down. There was some peace talks. And anyway, let's get back to Mohammed, the construction guy, and his son Osama, because this is where it really starts to heat up.
And it is this world of religious authority and deeply rooted traditions that is now being challenged by the wealth of oil and the Western invasion it has brought.
So it's now the 70s, and Mohammed bin Laden, the construction guy, is now insanely rich. His construction company is giant, his 54 children are also rich, and his son Osama is growing up and is in his 20s and is looking around at all of this stuff happening in Iran and in Israel and is starting to feel really uncomfortable with the notion of his family being so supportive of American presence in the Middle East and his government, this religious kingdom, home of Mecca and Medina, being so okay with the US so embedded in the Middle East at this point. These are ancient, holy lands. Why is my government and my family supporting this great Satan superpower coming in and becoming so involved in the Middle East? So bin Laden sets out on a lifelong quest to fight back against these superpowers, not just the US, but also the Soviet Union, invading the Middle East. He heads to Afghanistan, where the Soviet Union is invading Afghanistan, trying to take it over. Bin Laden wants to fight back. By the way, the same year in Iran, that dictator that the US put in gets overthrown in a giant religious revolution that gets rid of the old dictator that the US liked and puts in a religious government headed by this guy, Ayatollah Khomeini. This new government takes
So difficult names. Sorry. I can't pronounce.
a bunch of Americans hostage and starts off hating the United States. And I mean, can you blame them? If someone overthrew the person I elected, I would be pretty pissed too. So anyway, back to bin Laden. He arrives to Afghanistan with a few things. Number one, a bunch of money. Remember, his family's like super rich. He also comes with construction infrastructure because he's like a construction guy. Like his family knows construction and infrastructure building. But most importantly, he comes with an obsessive dedication to fighting back against any superpower that is invading the Middle East. So Osama joins in with all of these rebel fighters who are fighting back against the Soviet Union, and they fight a long, brutal war. By the way, the US was secretly loving this, loving that the Soviet Union was getting like beat back by these like rebel fighters. So they end up sending loads of weapons and money and support to these fighters, something that will come back to bite them a few decades later. Eventually, Osama and the Afghan fighters beat back the Soviet Union. It was 10 brutal years of war, and by the end, these fighters were battle-hardened. Osama was now completely dedicated to his cause of fighting back against superpowers who were coming into the Middle East. So he returns back to Saudi Arabia, where he starts raising money and awareness for his new group that he started while he was in Afghanistan. It's called Al-Qaeda, and the mission of the group is to protect Islam.
I know what a lot of groups, terrorist groups in Russia are prohibited. And yeah, that's why I want to say what this video just educational for me.
Through violently striking back against big superpowers coming into the Middle East. And Saudi Arabia's like, Osama, like, do you have to do this, dude? Do you realize how rich we're getting? Like, Saudi princes are living on yachts in the south of France and like flying in their private jets. And they're like, dude, chill. Like, it's fine, we get it, we don't like the United States, but like, can you like maybe chill? Our partnership with the United States is actually turning out to be really great, and I know, yeah, they're really into Israel and they're really bad and everything, but like, they buy our oil and they give us weapons and we're like doing just fine over here. Osama doesn't chill, and the Saudi government eventually takes away his passport, not letting him leave, and told him to hush up with all the anti-American holy war talk. So Osama finds another plan to maybe win back the heart of the royals. Saudi Arabia has a next-door neighbor named Iraq who is run by Saddam Hussein, who Osama sees as a really bad Muslim, totally secular and brutal, and he's just like not a good guy. Saddam is also cashing in on the oil boom. He's building big palaces and statues of himself all over the country. Oh yeah, and he also used the oil money to build a giant army, like the fourth biggest in the world. With this massive army, Saddam decided that he could maybe multiply his oil reserves if he popped down to invade this little tiny country of Kuwait, where there's also loads of oil. This sort of freaked the Saudis out. If Saddam, with his giant army, could grab Kuwait, what would stop him from marching right across this desert into Saudi Arabia? So there's this moment that it's like the moment of infamy of this whole thing, where Osama goes to the Saudis and he says,
"I volunteer as tribute."
He doesn't actually say, I volunteer in tribute, that was Hunger Games.
I believe we have a volunteer.
But he effectively says, I have me and my battle-hardened men who can go in and fight against Saddam and defend the kingdom. And the Saudis are like, no, we're not gonna let this ragtag group of rebel fighters fight off the fourth largest army in the world. And Osama's like, well, we beat the Soviets. They're a big army with nuclear weapons and everything. And the Saudis are like, yeah, because you hid in the hills in caves in Afghanistan. Prince Sultan literally told bin Laden verbatim, quote, there are no caves in Kuwait. And then he asks them,
I agree. It is a very important detail.
What will you do when he lobs the missiles at you with chemical and biological weapons? Osama's response, we will fight them with our faith. And the Saudis are like, awkward? Sorry, dude, Instead, the king met with somebody else that he thought would make a much better fit than bin Laden and his faith fighters. Dick Cheney had flown to Saudi Arabia the day after Saddam had invaded Kuwait. At this point, the bromance between the US and Saudi Arabia had cooled a little bit, as Saudi had gotten more and more flack for being in bed with the US. But even despite this, he told Cheney to come with as much force and as quickly as he could. And that is exactly what Dick Cheney did.
Ready and willing to employ all means necessary.
Yes, it is Cheney, Dick Cheney.
The US went insane here. They recruited 37 other countries, and then they sent more firepower in terms of ships and bombers and troops and all this stuff than you and I could ever imagine. It was insanity. And they totally crushed Saddam. Within a few weeks, they had pushed Saddam back and completely won over the hearts of the royals. The bromance is back in business. So now you have these Saudis that are beaming at the Americans for helping them fight off Saddam. And you have a bunch of bases that the US set up to mount this attack. Way more than before. The US came with all of this firepower and manpower and bases and artillery, and then they just sort of never left. Something that really pissed off a lot of Saudis who were very uncomfortable with US presence to begin with. But the guy who was most pissed off than anyone in the Middle East at this point? Osama bin Laden, who had not only been rejected by his own country, but then who got chosen instead? But the great Satan, the United States, a power that Osama had built his entire life fighting against. So Osama bin Laden starts to double down on his original mission. He leaves Saudi Arabia and begins coordinating very precise attacks that could really only be coordinated by a guy who was good at technical details of a construction company. and who had lots of money to fund it. He carries out attacks against the United States all around the world, and by the late 90s, he starts planning the attack that would change our world forever.
Of course. Yeah.
So this is just the first half of the story. What happens next is something that we're all kind of familiar with. In fact, I think we're all still kind of processing the US presence in the Middle East today and how that all went down. But it deserves taking a look at, and I'm not going to do that right now. I want to make it for Iraq and Israel and Iran and dive into each of these cases to show how the US presence in the Middle East is not just about oil. In fact, oil is becoming less and less of a vital aspect of the US presence as we have alternative sources of this sort of energy. Instead, our presence in the Middle East has become a fixture of how we think about foreign policy and how we think about the map. It's become so embedded in our military doctrine and in our foreign policy doctrine that it's proving to be really hard to think about how we could ever get out. Thank you everyone for watching this video. Man, the Middle East. The Middle East. It's a complicated place, and this is just a very broad overview. And like I said, I want to go deeper into each of these case studies because there's so much more to cover with each of these stories. Anyway, that is to come. Stay tuned for that. Thank you, Skillshare, for sponsoring.
Yeah, we did this. We did, and it was really useful. Thank you, Michael Hallam, to you for this recommendation. I understand what I knew nothing, and for me it was obvious, of course, but your opinion always important for me. You can leave your comments about this, about Middle East. What do you think? Where was did mistakes by Soviet Union, by the USA, by Saudi Arabia? What was wrong? Your opinion, just your opinion, because I will be happy to read your comments, and it can help me to improve my reading skill. Yeah, and of course you can support me. You can leave a like and subscribe to me. I appreciate it very much, and of course see you next time.